a todos, yo soy el león. Rugió la bestia en medio de la avenida. Todos corrieron sin entender. Panic show a plena luz del día. Por favor, no huyan de mí. Yo soy el rey de un mundo perdido. Soy el rey, te destrozaré. Todos los cómplices son de mi apetito. No te escapes, ven a mí. Desnúdate, enfrenta mis dientes. Yo soy el rey, el león. Ven a saber lo que se siente. Por favor, no huyan de mí. Yo soy el rey de un mundo perdido. Soy el rey, te destrozaré. Todos los cómplices son de mi apetito.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much.
¡Viva la libertad, carajo! ¡Muerte al socialismo! ¡Viva la libertad, carajo!
It's good for me because it allows me to recover the air. So if you want to give the local bandit a hard time, I have no problem. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you for this reception. It fills me with joy, with pride. But especially, I know it implies a huge responsibility to be the first libertarian president in history. So thank you. Also, I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to have the privilege not only to be here, but also to be able to close this event in which true giants have participated. People who have worked tirelessly and who have given their best, in which true giants have participated. People who I deeply admire, and he do so much for the cultural battle, so that this libertarian reality is a reality in Argentina, and that is advancing today all over the world, because freedom is advancing. Regarding today's speech, basically, it will have three parts, where after a short introduction, about the myths and politics that we are falling, I will make a brief description of the initial conditions we are facing. I will tell you how we did. What is happening today is a reality, and then I will tell you how Argentina is in the future in an introductory way. About a month or two ago, one of the brilliant ministers I have, Dr. Federico Stasniger, said in Argentina, we are breaking three myths about economic policy. He comments that many presidents or ministers of economy from different parts of the world, faced with debt problems and the problem of a tax deficit, which is the opposite of debt. Then they ask him to make a tax adjustment, and he says, well, he made a tax adjustment. Then Federico says, well, how much do you have to adjust? Well, 4 or 5 points of the PBI. And then he says, how much do you think he can adjust per year? Well, 1 point. And then Federico says and says, and how would he see it? He make an adjustment of 5 points for the PPI in a month? He says, no, but that is impossible. Well, that's what we did in Argentina. That has to say that the first thing that we have broken in this is what has to do with the relationship between quantum and time. That is to say, we in strict rigor, when we reached the government, we made an adjustment of 7 points of the PBI. Basically, we arrived in a very critical situation. And if we did not adjust, today I would not be here, standing as president of Argentina. And let's say we overreact to the adjustment, because in the face of that situation, it was pure moment of motorbike. But it worked. The second me has to deal with that if you make an adjustment of these characteristics, the economy will sink into a recession. Unemployment will be due to the status for you. And a number of poor and homeless will rise to unbearable social levels. In fact, between the adjustment of the Treasury and the adjustment of the Central Bank, we made an adjustment of 15 points of the PBI, where adjustments of half the size of this adjustment had generated PBI falls of at least 11% to 15%. Therefore, they assured us that we were going to enter a Great Depression. For as we changed the type of adjustment, we decided that the adjustment had to be done by raising taxes. Thus, it had to be done by inflationary debt. That it was not with debt. That the adjustment had to be done by the parasite. The adjustment had to fall on the public sector. In that way, we lowered 30% in real terms the public spending. We made an adjustment of 15 points of the PBI, and that meant returning income to the private sector. And the consequence was that when we take December 24 against December 23, not only did the PBI fall, it rose 6%. We adjusted with the economic expansion. And not Lolita, but throughout the first quarter of this year, the economy has expanded from 6% to 8%, and now in the second quarter, we are doing this at 8%. So to the shitty politicians, no credit for the adjustment. If the politicians pay, the private sector expands.
Contra diciembre del 23, no solo que no hubo caída del PBI, subió 6%. Ajustamos con expansión económica.
The third myth is that when one makes the adjustment, although it is something the economy needs because it needs to recompose, that implies a drop in popularity, a drop in image. And in that sense, in the Iron Triangle, that my sister Karina, the boss, constitutes, that is here, stand up. Those command. He is the architect of the liberal triumph. That brilliant consultant that also accompanies us, that is Santiago Capiso. Faced with the situation, we said, we came to fulfill a task. If there is image and it has to be consumed by the good cause, we have to consume it. We have to do what we have to do. We have to stop looking at the voids. If we have to do what the economy requires, and unlike what everyone thought, and it was there, the image and the accompaniment and the popularity were going to be extinguished in the adjustment. Today the levels of popularity that we have are higher than those we had when we assumed. And if they take them from international consultants, they are still much higher. The image does not generate loss of image. If the adjustment falls on the political caste, the image rises because it is to give resources to the people. I'm now entering the bone of the discussion. I think one of the things by which we have been able to do what we are doing, and that the accompaniment continues, and then not only in terms of image, but also in terms of election results, is that during the campaign we said that we would prefer to say an uncomfortable truth, the four comfortable lie. That is, we have never lied to people. We always said what we were going to do. And in that sense, our policy was always clear. Our economic policy was clear, where we said that we were going to pass the motorcycle to the state. It was clear. Our position regarding the central bank, that say, although the name of dollarization was put, and people carried dollar bills with my face, we always talk about indigenous dollarization, something that is going on today. And we also talk about the institutional plan, the move towards the ideas of freedom, to make structural reforms that make Argentina become the freest country in the world, and all that in economic matter. Not only that we are fulfilling, we had very ambitious goals that said it was impossible. And yet today, we have fulfilled all the campaign goals. On the other hand, in times of security, in times of internal security, we point out that it had ended with abolitionism, and that basically whoever does it pays. Today Argentina shows the lowest crime rate in its history, because whoever does it pays. Not only that, but also that we decided to honor our armed forces. We started a process of re-equipment, and today Argentina starts between the first 20 military powers and having made the largest armament purchases in the last 50 years, we have done something for national security and internal security. And finally, we have also been clear in our foreign policy. We have systematically manifested in favor of peace, in favor of free trade, understanding, as Basquiat said, that where trade enters, bullets do not end. And in that sense, we are working to reach an agreement between Makassar and the European Union. We are working on a free trade agreement with the United States. We are working so that Argentina becomes an open and great country again. But we have not only stayed to point that out, we have also said that in Argentina we would embrace the values of the West, and the values of the West are neither more nor less than embracing the values of the West, and the values of the West embrace the Judeo-Christian culture, recognizing out of Israel and in politics. Let's say the Roman Republic, and in Greek democracy, that constitutes the liberal democracy that we have come to defend in the values of the West, and that is manifested in my alliance. To be surprised by what we are doing in international matters. Therefore, we have said what we were going to do, because if there is something that has characterized me throughout my life, it is not only to say what I think, but to do wise saying. And after so many years from the tribune, saying what had to be done, I decided to get on the field to see the ideas of freedom and their freedom triumphs in the whole world. Naturally, they will say that a libertarian liberal comes to the presidency of a country. That does not happen in normal conditions of pressure and temperature. The reality is that at the time of getting to power, Argentina conjugated the worst of its three worst crises in history, which clearly, if it had happened, it would have been a real disaster. Basically, we had a monetary imbalance, the double that we had in the year 1975, when a crisis broke out that was called the Rodriguez, and basically the inflation rate doubled. Think that if Argentina came with levels of inflation of the order of 300%, it would have led to inflation at least levels of 2,000%. At the same time, we had a situation of bankruptcy in the central bank, even worse than the one we had in the year 1989, when the hyperinflation of Alfonsín broke out, where basically they had left us in the passive of the central bank, the equivalent of 4 monetary bases, defeating one day. This is, we could have doubled the amount of money in one day. That is to say, everything given, but not only that. The social indicators we had were indicators that were worse than the ones we had in the year 2001. In fact, when we sincerely the macroeconomic variables, because basically, among other things, in the exchange market there was a gap between the official dollar and the parallel of 200%. There would also be price controls, and clearly that in the statistics, the scarcity is not manifested. So when the variables were sincere, obviously the poverty registered jumped to 57%. Excuse me, 57%. And a year later, poverty fell to 35%. That is to say that the liberal heartless, those who do not have a heart, those who do not have empathy, those who do not take care of the poor. That is to say, we take out 10 million people from poverty, go to the city of freedom. They work for everyone and especially for those who have less. And now, macroeconomic disaster that they had left us, we also had the equivalent to $90 billion debt in pesos, winning in less of 3 months, with which that would also have involved only 15 points of the PBI additional monetary base, when the monetary base at that time in Argentina was in 2.5 points. That is, if we have multiplied only for that, in 7.5 times the amount of money increment. Not only that, the previous government also, with the control of changes, gave to friends rights to be able to import the type of change official and that had left a debt of $45 billion. In addition, the systematic failure of the goals with the International Monetary Fund, they made the agreement also for, that is, we were in a situation that if we did not act quickly, we ended up at default with multilateral organizations, in commercial default and in default, in the local financial system, which would have been a real macroeconomic disaster, and they would have led to poverty at levels of 95% at least. In turn, we had a fiscal deficit in the treasury of 5 points of the PBI, and we had debt. And it led to 15 points of the PBI. In that sense, the first stage of the plan, a stabilization, was to apply the chainsaw. The chainsaw, basically, avoiding implied an adjustment in the treasury of 7 points of the PBI, and that over time, it was recomposing and ended up being an adjustment of 5 points of the PBI. But in the face of the emergency, we had to solve, and that's why the adjustment was 5 points of 7, and then it ended up being 5 in the treasury. In that context, we take affirm the number of ministries and the vast majority of the contracts that they were winning, we did not renew, making it a really strong adjustment. We ended up eliminating the public work, which is an infinite source of corruption, and we also ended up with the official guidelines in the media, because of which they talk shit about us every day. And it's incredible because days ago they questioned us, and they talk about the loss of freedom of expression, where the only thing that went down in Argentina in terms of expression was that they stopped giving money to the corrupts of the media,
que iban venciendo no los renovamos. Haciendo un ajuste verdaderamente fuertísimo, terminamos eliminando la obra pública, que es una
it seems that they are very good at accusing when the subsidies are owned by others, but not when they touch the most sensitive organ of this human being, which is the pocket. So in telling you, if you come to say that I killed Kennedy, and I tell you that I was born in 1970, with which I couldn't do it, from closing the tax deficit, from the conception of the monetary nature of inflation, we had to cut the emission and close the tax deficit. It was this first stage, and we did it. Argentina, in the previous 123 years, had always had a tax deficit. And if there are some periods that don't, it's because it's in default. And we went to a zero deficit policy. That is, we decided that in Argentina, there's no more tax deficit. And Argentina is one of the 5 countries in the world that doesn't have a tax deficit in a financial line. And we did it after 123 years of history, where no one did it, and we did it in the first month of government. But I said, that scoundrel that I have as Minister of Economy, Luis Torto Capito, even when we had got the tax accounts in order in the Treasury, the order in the Treasury was not enough, because the problem we had in the central bank was twice the size of the problem of the Treasury. And if we didn't fix the issue of the central bank, we would have had the same hyperinflation, or the aggravating that we did it by making the tax adjustment. That would have been tremendously lethal for the ideas of freedom. And in that sense, in a cyclopean task, monumental among Torto Capito, the president of the central bank, Santiago Bossoli, and the finance secretary started a job to clean the balance, and in the measure that we should, that the tax deduction had come to stay, it was possible to start cleaning the debt of the central bank. And so, in the middle of last year, was when the stage 2 of the program was concluded, which was when it was finished with the monetary emission. The almost tax deficit was finished in Argentina. In the middle of last year, the accounts of the central bank and the amount of money from that moment has been fixed. That is to say, in that moment, we went to what was zero emission, and with a monetary base, and Argentina is wide. In fact, in the middle of a speculative attack, the type of parallel change have been shot. And we said, the types of change are going to converge, but they are going to converge with the fall of the parallel. And effectively, that was what happened. However, we realized that the Argentine economy was recovering very strongly. The economy after the month of April started to show very important signs of recovery. In fact, between December and April, it spread to 10%. And in that sense, in addition, the monetization of Argentina was very low. Therefore, in the face of that situation, in which we saw an increase in the demand for money, to leave the amount of money fixed. It was going to generate a problem that once the monetary surplus was finished, the Argentine economy could enter in a context of deflation. In that context, we launched the endogenous dollarization. That is, we allowed the agents to make all the transactions of the economy except the tax payment. All the transactions could be made in foreign currency. And in that sense, it had also been fulfilled with another campaign promise. It was impossible. However, the agents did not make the transactions in foreign currency. That is, it did not represent a problem because there was still surplus money. But sooner or later the problem was going to appear. And at the same time, we were still continuing with restrictions and with changes. In that sense, for us the CIPRO was a tool of torture, and it was also a tool with which they criticized us. Not only those who had bought the CIPO, but they also criticized us, what I call the liberals. Without a doubt, the high stray fee, or the libertarian and stupid idiots, has been taken by the ignorant idiots in monetary issues of Hans Gemmerhoff. Whereby making a gala of an infinite ignorance, but driven by Argentine garbage that they beast. You can imagine, let's say the ones who know me who they are, the same ones who asked for Juan de Mariana not to give it to me. And the same people. He said that this reform is easiest with closing the central bank. The problem was over. It seems the idiot does not know that the remunerated debt and the debt of the future emission bank and the monetary base are debt. And if we had closed the central bank in that way, that debt was worth nothing. And therefore, it would have generated a hyperinflation. And thanks to that stupidity, the Peronist populace would have turned with their heads. And today you would be seeing in Argentina, the Argentina Chavista. Then, given the aberration that the CIPO implied, basically because it restricts the freedom that I can do with my money what I want, basically because then it conditions my set of elections, and that is an unbearable affront for a libertarian liberal, but also the fact that they are forced to demand more domestic currency than they want, in addition to the inflationary tax, which is also a non-legislator tax that is inadmissible even for a classic liberal. Therefore, the CIPO had to get it out anyway, and in that sense, we started working on a program with the International Monetary Fund to clean the sheet of the central bank. And the idea was just as the national state would place non-transferable public bonds to the central bank, and that is how the dollars were taken. We considered that it was time to recapitalize the central bank. Therefore, we made an agreement with the International Monetary Fund to rescue that debt from the central bank in such a way that the total debt did not increase, but that the pesos that the Argentinians now have in their pockets are worth something. That is, we made the adjustment to the CAS
programa
to retain the money to the people of good.
para limpiar la hoja del Banco Central. Y la idea era que así como el
In
Estado
that
Nacional
context,
le colocaba
we estimated that to get out of the SIPO,
no transferibles
we
al
needed
Banco
about
Central y así se llevaba
$12 billion. And as Toto and I
recapitalizar el Banco Central.
are very risk-averse people,
Por lo tanto, hicimos una
I understand that you think that I am
para ir
risk-averse,
pagando esa deuda del Banco Central.
but think that it is like a situation
No aumentara.
why I'm without any
Y
clothes.
ahora tienen los argentinos
Everything is wet in an electric chair.
valieran algo. Es decir, le hicimos el ajuste a la casta.
So,
para devolver
let's
el
say
dinero a la
they are going
gente.
to be very careful that cables come on now. And then we said that if we got $15 billion, we were going to open the SIPO, and in such a way that we had for a speculative attack to camp with $3 billion. And in that context, they gave us $20 billion cash. Then they said no, that I was not going to be encouraged to open the SIPO in an electoral year, because that was going to jump the type of change, and that the inflation rate was going to be in the 5 or 7%, where the media garbage, while the crops of the journalists were dedicated to spreading those inundated news, even when no one had made those forecasts. That's why, as my friend Wall Street Boverick says, we did not give enough to the journalists. And despite the fact that we were in an electoral year, despite the fact that they said that the type of change was going to go to the roof of the band, in contrast to what everyone thought, we opened the SIPO, we completed the stage 3 of the program, we opened the SIPO, and far from going to the roof of the band, today the type of change is much closer to the floor of the band. Point for the government, point against, again for the connoisseurs and the leftover journalists.
No odiamos lo suficiente a los periodistas.
In fact, today, after they anticipated those inflation rates from 5 to 7% per month, it is true the inflation rate jumped to 3.7, but they said that it was going to stay in at levels of 5 and 7. The next month it fell to 2.8. This month it is expected to break 2%. And I assure you from here that for the next year the inflation in Argentina will have been history of the past.
Punto en contra de nuevo para los econochantas y los periodistas ensobrados.
But all everything is there. In addition, for a long time, the fiscal service has by pursuing the Argentinians who wanted to protect themselves from that scam that was inflation. In fact, Argentina took away 13.0 from the currency. Today, we could take away 3.0 more if it was for that. That is to say that the monetary policy in Argentina has been a recurring scam. In addition, for not wanting to correct the origin of the problem, which was the fiscal deficit, it was pursued by the Argentinians with Soviet laws for wanting to escape the scam. So, for example, instead of grabbing and stopping the monetary emission, because that implied stopping the fiscal deficit, they used price controls. When the price controls did not work, they used the supply law. That is to say, another one, the Hercota collision. Or, for example, when you to cover your savings from the inflation of the weight, They were going to cover themselves in the dollar, so they put the supply law, capital controls. It was pursued by the Argentinians as if they were delinquents. In fact, we got to the madness that for the Argentinian fiscal, all the Argentinians were guilty, except that we showed the opposite. I have no doubt. Having a socialist in mind, that has the same problem. Go with it. A few days ago, we sent a new deregulation that has to do with the day of the liberation and the historical reparation to the Soros, where we allowed the Argentinians of good to use their undeclared dollars to be able to make transactions. It ended with the belief that the people are guilty before they showed the opposite. Now the Argentinians are innocent until they show the opposite.
Sin embargo, hace pocos días enviamos una nueva desregulación que tiene que ver con el Día de la Liberación y la reparación histórica a los ahorristas, donde le
Beyond anything, know that against the shitty socialists, I will always be on their side.
Se terminó eso de creer que la gente es culpable antes que demuestre lo contrario. Ahora los argentinos somos inocentes hasta que se demuestre lo contrario.
And at the same time, I also want to highlight the achievements we have had in social and security matters in that difficult context in which we had to assume the social policy that had left Quakerism, which is the reloaded version at the worst of Peronism. In that context, they had made of social policy a policy to harm the most vulnerable. This is, as every way socialism takes a noble cause and prostitutes it in favor of the corruption of those who are in power. And in that context, so adverse and so hostile, that minister I have in human capital, Sandro Petovolo, in an act of enormous courage, decided to confront the managers of poverty and decided that there was no need to pay more for a loan because that's where they stole the money to the vulnerable. That is, half of the money that went to the vulnerable was collected by the thieves, other managers of poverty. But of course, when we announce this, in that context, they threatened us with a march in Argentina that had between 8,000 and 9,000 tickets per year. In that context, they threatened us that they were going to make us a march, and they said they were going to be 50,000 people, when in reality they were waiting for 50,000 people. And in that context, thanks to another minister I have, Dr. Patricia Bullrich, presented to me
nos amenazaron con una marcha.
the anti-Piquet protocol,
Y Argentina
presented in a joint action
entre
between the Minister Patawulo,
por año.
the Minister Burrich,
En ese contexto,
and may he rest in peace.
con que nos iban a hacer una marcha.
He was the Minister of Transport, Dr. Guilherme Ferreira.
40.000 personas cuando en realidad estaban esperando 100.000 personas. Y en ese contexto,
They did an entire operation.
gracias a otra ministro que
We not only ticked the box out to the managers of poverty, we went out with the security forces, to which we gave total support. And the one who cut in that charge, the one who went to jail,
me presentó
and we used the transport networks
el protocolo
to inform him
y en ese sentido,
and also to make complaints.
junta entre la
That first day, we received 18,000 complaints, where many are already in justice,
paz descanse
and they're being sought against these scammers,
el doctor
but above all,
Ferraro.
from the first day, we put order in the streets. Because of the 100,000 that they expected, there were 3,000. And from that day, the chaos in Argentina ended, and the order reigned again. In fact,
Salimos con la fuerza
as part of his policing,
a la cual le dimos el total
that makes them pay in.
y aquel que
They say we stop having that doctrine
aquel que cortaba
that is in favor of the criminals.
y usamos la
Here we defend the victims,
de transporte para
not the
informarlos
victim.
y además para que se hicieran denuncias. Ese primer día recibimos
And in that
19
context,
denuncias, donde muchos ya están-
within the policies that we eliminated,
están resolviendo
were all gender policies,
trabajadores, pero sobre todas las
because
cosas,
they are policies that belittle women,
pusimos orden
because
en
they
la
treat
calle,
them as
porque
inferior
los
beings.
100.000 que esperaban
And what we liberals propose is that we are all equal in the face of the law.
y volvió a reinar el orden.
Then they baptized us that we were in favor of the feminists.
Es
And
más,
yet,
como parte de esta
the
política
homicide
de
against
raza
women
paga,
have dropped 14%.
digamos, dejamos de tener
And
esa
today,
lucha
Argentina is in the lowest crime
para
rate
los delincuentes.
in its history because whoever does it
Acá
pays.
se defiende a las víctimas, no al victimario. Y en ese contexto, dentro de las políticas que eliminamos, fue todas las políticas de
Therefore,
género, porque son políticas que menoscaban a la mujer. Porque
after so many achievements,
inferior, y lo que los
the moment of growth has begun.
somos todos iguales frente a la
Today,
ley.
Argentina has entered the path that if it continues to embrace the ideas of freedom, in 40 years, Argentina would be the first
Entonces,
world power without a doubt.
pensaron que nosotros estábamos a favor de los femicidios. Y sin embargo, los homicidios contra mujeres han caído 14% y hoy Argentina está en la tasa de
In this
delincuencia
sense,
más baja de su historia. Porque el que las
what I am
hace
going to
las
do
paga.
now is transmit each of the elements that are the pillar of economic growth. First of all,
Por lo
the
tanto,
fiscal adjustment of 15 points of the PBI, retain the income
de tantos logros,
to the Argentines
ha comenzado
that allowed
el momento del crecimiento.
Hoy
Argentina ha entrado en el
a recovery of economic activity, a recovery of salaries, a recovery of pensions, and a recovery of the stock cycle that allowed at first for the economy to start recovering very strongly from April last year. But not only that, the second point implies that the debt does not vary. We made it drop $45,000 million, the first time in Argentine democracy that the debt fell in the democracy since 1983 until now. But the important thing is that the policy of deficit zero implements that the debt-product relationship is not growing. That implies that Argentina is solvent in the meantime, that Argentina can honor its debt. And in that sense, not only that, it also implied that the country's risk of 3,000 basic points, that was when we won the election, today is in 600 basic points, and did not doubt that if in October violet countries painted, and we are on the way to becoming an investment grade. That is why, in the measure that falls the rate of our country, that falls the rate of interest, the stock of capital per capita of the economy will increase, and therefore productivity will rise. We are on a higher level of life. In that sense, a work of a very prestigious Argentine economist, who is called Tom Popper Niccolini, who works in the Federal Reserve, estimated that having made the adjustment that we did, bringing the deficit to zero, that could imply that Argentina can grow in a way sustained by a great number of years, that could oscillate between 10 and 20 years. However, as Niccolini points out, that method does not contemplate the type of adjustment. If we consider that the adjustment was not raising taxes, but was lowering public spending, and if we also consider that we have already done more than 2,500 structural reforms, Argentina will grow very strongly, and the numbers are realizing that Argentina is on the way to being great again. In addition, the fact of ending the inflation has two very positive impacts. In the first place, because it eliminates the distortion of relative prices, it expands the time horizon, and in that way, the resources can be assigned in a better way. At the same time, being a highly regressive tax, it distorted the relationship between savings and investments, and therefore also the interest rate, and therefore the accumulation of capital, leading to incorrect investments. Because basically, the relative prices were distorted, and this will imply that when the inflation is eliminated, this distortion will disappear, and this will have an effect once and for all. It will also imply a jump in the PPI per capita, that in the whole horizon will also manifest its growth. On the other hand, we consider that the state is a criminal organization, and in that sense we consider that taxes are a robbery. And in that sense, last year, even in this process of stabilization, not only that we stopped scoffing at Argentinians with seniority, but also we have lowered the explicit taxes to 2 points of the PPI, something that the Argentinian history has never done. But you will imagine that if I consider that taxes are a robbery, I will not stay here. In that sense, we are working on a tax reform, and according to the estimates we have, if the Argentinian economy from here to 2031, in case I have to be re-elected, we could be lowering more than 1.5 points of the PPI per year of taxes, and that would mean returning to the Argentinians of neither more nor less than $500,000 million. But that is still libertarian. On the other hand, We are also doing a lot of work from the Ministry of Human Capital. We have a Ministry of Human Capital that integrates the human capital that has to do with basically health, this fate, because if you do not eat or do not have good health, you cannot educate. This therefore also integrates with the human capital of the second generation that has to do not only with the possibility of studying, but also with the possibility of reinserting those who are left on the road. That is, remember that we are starting from an economy in imbalance, and the third part with which it integrates is with the labor market. In that sense, we are working on the human capital of the first generation, the second generation, and so that it can be inserted in a labor market where today close to half of the job in the economy is informal. Therefore, this will not only imply an improvement in the working conditions, but also in a measure that the differential is closed between formal employees and the total of employment. That is, that the informal positions are narrowed. That will also allow us to reform the provisional system, and in that way also have a second additional turn of growth from here to the future. Obviously, now it's up to another of the star ministries. Let's say our two ministries, of which I'm very proud. I say outside the Ministry of Economy, with whom I have a symbiotic relationship. It's apart from the fact that I do, let's say, the work of Minister Borg, of Minister Petron. But there are two creatures that I believe that did not exist in the world. One is the Human Capital Ministry, and the other ministry is a Ministry of Federico, the Ministry of Deregulation. The essential concept of the Ministry of Deregulation is a frontal and direct attack. It is a neoclassical tool. Never again present in my mind that wonderful paper that made me a libertarian. I remember on here the dear Philip Agis. He usually mentions that. I remember that one day they brought me the work of Mari Nitin Rothbard, Monopoly in Competition, which is in the second volume of The Man and the Economy in the State. And after 3 hours of reading the article of 140 pages and 25 years as a professor of microeconomics, I finished reading the article and said, everything I taught in the last 25 years of market structure is wrong. And that day I became an anarcho-capitalist. When you look at the statistics of the economic growth per capita and the PPI per capita since the Christian era, you will discover that it has the shape of a hockey stick. And if you look at the statistics of the economic growth per capita and the PPI per capita, and if you look at the statistics of the economic growth per capita in the last 250 years, in a context where the population is multiplied by 10 times, and the extreme poverty that was at 95%, today we have to change the measure all the time, because otherwise it would be zero. So the question was, how can it be that the growing performance that a neoclassical economy associates with the monopolies, and they say that according to the term, optimal of Pareto is bad, had taken so many people out of poverty? Something had to be wrong. And there, let's say, the one who opened my eyes was Murray Nugent Rufford. Basically, what you have is that the structure of the neoclassical economy is armed to be able to prove the existence of the uniqueness and stability of equilibrium, and that made us focus on mathematics and not what it meant, what we were saying in economic terms when using that math that is in the neoclassical economy. This problem is called a non-convexity problem. That is to say, like having a dilemma between the Theophilus factory of Adam Smith and the invisible hand. So to stay in the Pareto vision of the invisible hand, we sacrifice the Theophilus factory. And the worst of all is that we are left without being able to explain, because the constant performance of that scale, or the marginal performance of growth, what they do is that economic growth disappears. And in that sense, that is why the Rufford paper is so inspiring, because it shows that the monopolies are only bad as they are generated from the state, for example, the monetary mission. And in that sense, when a company is regulated that has growing performance on that scale, and they want to assimilate it to a competitive in the neoclassical paradigm, they kill the growing performance. And by killing the growing performance, they kill economic growth. If they want an applied example of regulating, killing the growing performance, and ending economic growth, they don't have to go very far, just look around. Europe is the best example where regulations are killing economic growth. And in that sense, we begin to deregulate the economy and make structural reforms. The Menem government, that according to work of Chirac de la Pola, Bossau and Irigoyen, that had been the best government in Argentina's history, had made 100 structural reforms. Today we have made 25 times more structural reforms, and we have lowered inflation much faster than convertibility, and without making expropriations, we have increased relative prices, respecting property rights. So don't doubt that this liberal, libertarian government is the best government in Argentina's history. At the same time, we also have as an objective that Argentina is the freest country in the world, because those countries that are free are 12 times richer than the repressed. They grow twice, they have 25 times less for the poor in the standard format, and 50 times less in the extreme format. And as part of this agenda is that we work in what has to do with economic opening. At the same time, we are also working in a tax reform that allows competition between different provincial states, so that the provinces also start to lower taxes. In fact, in some municipalities that is being done. In fact, someone who had been a colleague of mine in college and who in life found us in politics, the intendant of February 3, Diego Valenzuela, is lowering taxes, and the companies are leaving from the places of the Peronists to invest in February 3, because basically the taxes are being lowered. Finally, we have the incentive regime for the big investments, and where, for example, days ago we signed with the company Eni for an investment of $20,000 million, and that will leave a flow of income of taxes for Argentina in the next 20 years, close to $200,000 million. The model is working. Therefore, I want to leave is the testimony that the ideas of freedom are working. Therefore, we know what we have to do. We know how to do it. Therefore, we don't lack the courage to do it because we are the ones who can stand up for everyone.
Por una inversión de $20.000 millones y que va a dejar un flujo de ingresos de divisas para la Argentina en los próximos 20 años cercano a los 200.
And that is why I ask you to take courage, to get involved into play, and to fight in politics. Because it doesn't change from the stands. It changes by fighting body to body. Let's support the ideas of freedom. Let's open the Great West again. Long life freedom. Long life freedom. Long life Spain. Long life Argentina. Long life freedom. Thank you very much.